The rain in Seoul did not wash the city clean. It merely made the neon lights bleed into the asphalt, turning the streets into a blurred oil painting of red and electric blue. For Kang Min-jun, the weather was an inconvenience, nothing more. He stepped out of the armored sedan, his Italian leather shoes splashing onto the wet pavement, flanked by three men who moved with the synchronized precision of well-oiled machinery. They held umbrellas over him, shielding him from the deluge, but Min-jun didn't look up. His eyes were fixed on the crumbling brick facade of the grand, archaic building before him, the Hanam Museum of Cultural Heritage. To the public, it was a failing institution drowning in debt, a dusty tomb for pottery and forgotten scrolls. To Min-jun, the newly appointed head of the Gyeongseong Syndicate, it was a washing machine. It was the perfect vessel to legitimize billions of won in illicit gambling revenue. He adjusted the cuffs of his suit, his face a mask of bored indifference, and walked through the heavy oak doors. Inside, the air smelled of floor wax and decaying paper. The current director, a trembling man named Mr. Choi, was already bowing so low his forehead nearly grazed the polished floor tiles. Min-jun walked past him without a word, his stride eating up the distance of the grand lobby. He wasn't interested in the Goryeo Celadon in the display cases or the Joseon dynasty robes mounted on headless mannequins. He was interested in the layout, the security, and the solitude. His life was a cacophony of shouting, gunshots, screams, and the constant grinding noise of political maneuvering. He craved silence. He moved deeper into the building, his entourage trailing behind him, their footsteps echoing loudly in the cavernous halls. They inspected the offices, the storage rooms, and the vaults. It was when they reached the basement level, the archives, that the atmosphere shifted. The basement was a labyrinth of steel shelves and towering stacks of boxes. The air here was cooler, heavy with the scent of old ink and time. It was a place where history went to be sorted, catalogued, or forgotten. Min-jun signaled for his men to stay back at the freight elevator. He wanted to walk the perimeter alone. He moved down the narrow aisles, his fingers grazing the spines of leather-bound ledgers. At the far end of the archive, bathed in the warm, yellow glow of a single desk lamp, sat a woman. She was unlike anyone he expected to find in this subterranean tomb. She was black, her skin rich and dark against the cream-colored sweater she wore, her hair braided back in intricate rows that exposed the elegant curve of her neck. She was hunched over a fragile document, holding a magnifying glass with the precision of a surgeon. Min-jun stopped 10 feet away. Usually, people sensed him. They felt the drop in temperature, the predatory aura he projected, or they simply heard the heavy tread of his expensive shoes. But she did not move. She did not flinch. She turned a page with agonizing slowness, scribbling a note on a pad beside her. Min-jun cleared his throat. Nothing. He stepped closer, deliberately letting his heel strike the concrete floor hard enough to create a sharp report. Still, she remained lost in the paper. Irritation flared in his chest. He was not a man who was ignored, but it was quickly replaced by curiosity. He walked right up to the edge of her desk and cast a shadow over her work. Nia felt the change in light before she felt the presence. The warm glow of her lamp was suddenly eclipsed by a broad, dark shape. She didn't jump. She had trained herself out of startling easily years ago. Instead, she looked up, her eyes traveling from the crisp line of the suit trousers, past the fitted jacket, up to the face of the man looming over her. He was devastatingly handsome, with sharp, angular features and eyes that were cold, calculating, and currently narrowed in assessment. He said something, his lips moving in sharp, distinct shapes, but the world remained as it always was for her, absolutely silent. She blinked, placing her magnifying glass down gently. She tapped her ear and shook her head slightly, then reached for the notepad she used for the few colleagues who bothered to come down here. She wrote in neat, block Korean Hangul, "I cannot hear you. I am deaf." She turned the pad toward him. Min-jun stared at the words. The irritation vanished, replaced by a strange sensation he couldn't quite name. In a life where every whisper could be a conspiracy and every loud word a threat, He had found a woman who existed in a bubble of absolute quiet. He looked at her again, really looked at her. Her eyes were large, expressive, and entirely unafraid. She wasn't looking at him with the sycophantic fear Mr. Choi had shown. She was looking at him with the annoyance of a librarian whose reading had been interrupted. He reached into his jacket pocket, produced a silver fountain pen, and turned the notebook around. His handwriting was jagged and aggressive. "I bought this building. I own the silence you are enjoying." Nia read the words and suppressed a scoff. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze dead on, and took the pen back. "Then you should appreciate that I'm the only one working hard enough not to notice you coming in. I'm Nia. I'm the archivist." Min-jun felt the corner of his mouth twitch. A challenge. She was a civilian, a foreigner and disabled, yet she looked at the head of the Jeomseon clan as if he were merely a patron who had forgotten his library card. "Kang Min-jun," he wrote, "what are you working on?" "The colonial occupation records," she wrote back, gesturing to the stacks of crumbling papers. 1910 to 1945, sorting the lies from the truth. He stared at the phrase, sorting the lies from the truth. It resonated with him. He nodded once, stiffly, and then turned to leave without another gesture. As he walked away, Nia watched his back. She could feel the vibration of his footsteps through the floorboards now that she was paying attention, a heavy, rhythmic thrumming that faded as he reached the elevator. She exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. There was violence in the way that man moved, a kinetic energy that felt like a coiled spring. But for some reason, he had left her peace intact. Over the next month, the museum changed. Security cameras were installed in corners that previously held cobwebs. Men in dark suits stood by the entrances, checking IDs with intimidating scrutiny. The flow of legitimate visitors dried up, but late at night, men with briefcases came and went through the rear loading docks. Nia noticed it all, but she kept her head down. She was on a visa that depended on this job, and her passion was the history in these boxes, not the present-day corruption of the ownership. However, the basement became a strange neutral ground. Min-jun began to visit. At first, it was ostensibly to check on the renovations of the lower levels, but he never brought his guards down. He would come alone, usually around 8 p.m. when the rest of the staff had fled. He would pull up a metal stool from the corner and sit near her desk, loosening his tie. They didn't always write. Sometimes he would just sit there, closing his eyes, basking in the silence that surrounded her. For Min-jun, Nia was an anchor. Upstairs, he was ordering hits, negotiating turf wars with the Russian Bratva and bribing assemblymen. Down here, the only sound was the scratch of Nia's pen or the rustle of paper. It was the only place he didn't have to listen for a betrayal. One rainy Tuesday, he slid a cup of expensive, steaming coffee across her desk. He tapped the wood to get her attention. When she looked up, he opened the notebook. "You look tired. The dead can wait." Nia smiled, a genuine, warm expression that made Min-jun's chest tighten unexpectedly. She took the coffee, savoring the warmth against her palms. "The dead are impatient," she wrote. "I found a box from 1938 today. It was mislabeled as agricultural supplies. It's actually police records." Min-jun leaned forward, reading her script. "Dangerous times," he wrote. "Truth is always dangerous," she replied. "That's why people hide it." He watched her profile as she went back to reading a faded document. He found himself fascinated by her hands, strong, capable hands that treated the rotting paper with more tenderness than he had ever been shown in his life. He wanted to tell her that he was a monster, that the money paying her salary was soaked in blood, but he couldn't bring himself to break the spell. In her silence, he was just a man in a suit, not a killer. The turning point came 3 weeks later. The autumn wind was howling outside, rattling the upper windows of the museum, but the basement was still as a tomb. Nia was working on a heavy, iron-bound ledger she had found at the bottom of a rusted filing cabinet. The lock had been broken decades ago. She had spent the last 3 hours carefully separating the pages with tweezers. using a special solution to make the faded ink legible again. As the characters became clear, Nia's blood ran cold. It was a private accounting book, not a government record. It detailed transactions between the Japanese Imperial Army and a local Korean merchant group known as the Hanul Syndicate. The transactions were for labor units, a euphemism for human beings sent to work in mines and factories in Manchuria. But it wasn't just the atrocities that made her hands tremble. It was the name of the supplier. Kang Du-hyun. She knew that name. It was on the plaque in the lobby, in honor of our founder, Kang Du-hyun. It was Min-jun's grandfather, the man Min-jun spoke of with guarded reverence, the man whose portrait hung in the executive office. The official story was that the Kang family had been resistance fighters who made their fortune in construction after the war. This ledger proved otherwise. It proved the foundation of the Jeomseon clan, and Min-jun's entire empire was built on selling their own people into slavery and collaborating with the occupiers. Nia sat back, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't just history, this was ammunition. In the current political climate, with the government cracking down on anti-nationalist roots, this document could destroy the Kang family. It would freeze their assets, lead to prosecutions, and shatter Min-jun's legitimacy within the underworld. Rivals would eat him alive if they knew his power came from betrayal. She closed the book, her breath coming in short gasps. She needed to hide it. She needed to think. She stood up, clutching the ledger to her chest, turning to find a safe place on the shelves. As she turned, she froze. Min-jun was standing at the end of the aisle. He had come down quietly, as he always did now, seeking his sanctuary. But his eyes were not soft tonight. They were locked on the book in her arms. He saw the age of it. He saw the way she was holding it like a shield. And he saw the fear in her eyes, a look he had never seen there before. He walked toward her slowly. The vibration of his steps felt different to Nia this time, heavier, predatory. He stopped 2 feet from her and held out his hand. He didn't write a note. He didn't need to. The command was absolute. Nia hesitated. She looked at the book, then at him. She thought of the men she had seen in the alleyways, the guns she knew they carried. She thought of his kindness, the coffee, the quiet moments shared in the pool of lamplight. She realized with a sinking heart that the man who brought her coffee and the man standing before her were 2 different entities, and the latter was capable of burning this entire world to ash to protect his secrets. She stepped back, shaking her head. Min-jun's eyes hardened. He closed the distance in a second, his hand gripping her wrist, not painfully, but with an iron firmness that allowed no escape. He pulled her hand away from the book and took it with his other hand. He opened it. He couldn't read the dense, archaic Hanja as quickly as she could, but he saw the name, Kang Du-hyun, and he saw the stamps of the Imperial Army. He knew enough of his family's whispered history to understand what he was holding. He looked up at Nia. For a long, agonizing minute, they just stared at each other. The silence between them, usually a bridge, suddenly felt like a vast, icy canyon. He held the evidence of his family's sins in one hand and the woman who had unearthed them in the other. He should kill her. That was the rule. Anyone who saw the truth had to be silenced. But as he looked at her defiant, terrified face, he realized his hand was still wrapped around her wrist, his thumb brushing against her pulse. He couldn't do it. He slammed the book shut, the sound vibrating through the table she was leaning against. He grabbed the notepad from the desk and scribbled furiously, the paper tearing under the pressure of the pen. He shoved it at her. "Does anyone else know?" Nia looked at the jagged letters. She shook her head. Min-jun stared at her, his chest heaving slightly. He released her wrist. He didn't take the book. Instead, he shoved it back into her hands. It was a gesture of insanity, and he knew it. He wrote again, his hand shaking slightly. "Hide it. If my enemies find this, we are both dead. Keep it safe. Keep your silence." He turned and stormed out of the archives, leaving Nia standing alone in the pool of yellow light, clutching the book that could destroy him. wondering why he had just entrusted his life to her. The ledger, now wrapped in layers of acid-free tissue paper and shoved inside a mislabeled box of 1970s tax receipts, felt radioactive. Nia could feel its presence from across the room, a black hole of historical guilt sitting on shelf 4B for 3 days. She worked in a state of heightened paranoia. Every time the HVAC system groaned or the freight elevator rumbled, her head snapped up, eyes scanning the shadows. But Min-jun did not come back immediately, and neither did his executioners. The museum above her continued its facade of normalcy. She saw the new security guards patrolling the perimeter, men with thick necks and ill-fitting suits who looked at the artifacts with boredom and the exits with professional intensity. Nia realized that Min-jun had doubled the guard, not just to protect his money laundering operation, but to protect the basement, to protect the secret, to protect her. He returned on the 4th night. The rain had turned to a biting wind that whistled through the cracks of the old building, but down in the archives, the air was still. Nia was repairing a torn map of 1920s Gyeongseong when she felt the familiar rhythmic vibration in the floorboards. It was him. He didn't stride in with the aggression he had shown previously. He walked slowly, his shoulders slumped under the weight of an invisible burden. He was carrying a plastic bag. He pulled up his usual metal stool, sat down, and placed the bag on her desk. Inside were 2 containers of samgyetang, ginseng chicken soup. He opened them, the steam rising between them like a white curtain. He took the notebook, which now lay permanently on the corner of her desk, a designated bridge between their worlds. "Eat," he wrote. "You are too thin, and the heating in this building is terrible." Nia looked at the soup, then at him. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes and a small cut on his lower lip that hadn't been there before. She picked up her pen. "You look like you've been fighting." Min-jun read it and let out a short, humorless breath. "Business," he wrote. "Negotiations are just fights where you wear ties." He paused, the pen hovering over the paper. "Is it safe?" Nia knew what he meant. "It is hidden where no one looks. Why didn't you destroy it?" Min-jun took a spoonful of soup, eating mechanically. He wrote while he chewed. "My grandfather was a hero to my family. He built the foundation that keeps hundreds of families fed. If I destroy it, I save his lie. If I keep it, I hold his truth. I don't know which is worse yet, but I couldn't watch you burn." Nia felt a flush of heat rise up her neck that had nothing to do with the steam. "You barely know me," she wrote. "I know you listen," he replied, underlining the word listen. "Everyone else in my life talks. They ask for money, for mercy, for power. They lie, you just watch. It is quiet with you." That night marked a shift. The basement archive ceased to be a place of employment and became a confessional. Min-jun started coming every night, sometimes as late as 2 a.m. He would bring food, midnight snacks from street vendors, expensive whiskey, sometimes just fruit. They would sit for hours. He would vent about the treacherous politics of the syndicate, writing furious paragraphs about his lieutenant's incompetence or the encroaching pressure from the police. Nia would write back with observations from history, drawing parallels between his struggles and the dynastic wars of the Joseon era. She learned that he hadn't wanted this life. He had wanted to be an architect. He loved lines, structure, things that made sense. But as the eldest son of the eldest son, his path had been paved in concrete and blood before he was born. In turn, she told him about losing her hearing at 7 due to a fever, how the world had become a frightening place until she realized that silence allowed her to see things others missed. She told him about her love for the truth, no matter how ugly. "Truth is a weapon," Min-jun wrote one evening, watching her meticulously clean a dusty photograph. "And you are holding a grenade." "Truth is a foundation," she countered. "Build on lies and you collapse." He looked at her then, a long, lingering gaze that made her breath hitch. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. Before he tucked a stray braid behind her ear. His fingers were rough, but his touch was electric. In the silence, the connection between them hummed louder than any spoken declaration. But the world outside the basement was closing in. The threat came in the form of the Beak clan. They were an old rival faction, ruthless and hungry, led by the snake-like Beak Dong-su. They had been pushed out of Seoul 10 years ago by Min-jun's father, but they were clawing their way back, sensing weakness in the transition of power to Min-jun. Nia didn't know the politics, but she saw the signs. One afternoon, while retrieving a box from the upper storage, she saw a group of men touring the museum lobby with Mr. Choi. They weren't ordinary visitors. They moved like wolves. One of them, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow, stopped and stared at the door leading to the basement stairs. He lingered there for a long time, sniffing the air like a hunting dog, until Mr. Choi nervously ushered him away. When Min-jun arrived that night, the atmosphere was brittle. He didn't sit. He paced the length of the aisle, his hands clenched into fists. "We have a problem," he wrote, pressing the pen so hard the paper nearly tore. "The Beak clan. They know about the rumors. They know my grandfather had a ledger. They don't know what's in it, but they know it gives them leverage. They think it's here." Nia felt a cold shiver. The men today. One of them was looking at the basement door. Min-jun's eyes widened as he read her note. He swore silently, kicking a metal shelf. The clang vibrated through the floor, startling Nia. He turned to her, grabbing her shoulders. He forced her to look at him, his expression fierce and desperate. He grabbed the pad. "You need to leave. Tonight, I will have a car take you to the airport. I have an apartment in Vancouver. Go there. I will wire you money." Nia stared at the words. He was sending her away. The thought caused a sharp physical pain in her chest. She pulled away from him and grabbed the pen. "No." "Nia, don't be stupid," he scribbled rapidly. "These men will torture you to find where the paper is. They will burn this place down." "This is my work," she wrote back, her handwriting becoming messy with emotion. "This is history. I am the archivist. I don't run. If I leave, who protects the truth? You. You'll just bury it again. I am trying to protect you." He underlined it 3 times. "Then let me stay," she wrote. "I know this building better than anyone. I know hiding spots you couldn't dream of. If they come, they won't find the ledger and they won't find me. But if I run, I look guilty. If I stay, I am just the deaf foreign librarian who knows nothing." Min-jun stared at her. Her chin was tilted up, her eyes blazing with a stubborn resolve that rivaled any gangster he had ever faced. She was refusing a direct order from a man who commanded an army. It was infuriating. It was terrifying. And it was the most attractive thing he had ever seen. He threw the pen down and ran a hand through his hair. He couldn't force her, not without hurting her, and the thought of that was impossible. He paced again, then stopped in front of her. He took her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. He looked deep into her eyes, trying to convey the gravity of her choice. He picked up the pen one last time. "If you stay, you are in the war. There is no going back." Nia took the pen. "I was in the war the moment I found that book. I'm staying." Min-jun nodded slowly. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, sleek black object, a panic button. He placed it in her hand and curled her fingers around it. "Press this," he wrote, "and I will come, no matter what." He left then, needing to secure the perimeter, but the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. They were no longer just a criminal and a civilian, or a boss and an employee. They were co-conspirators. 2 nights later, the fragile piece shattered. Nia was working late, cataloging a series of pottery shards. The museum was closed. The night guard, a young man on Min-jun's payroll, usually sat at the top of the stairs, but tonight Nia felt a strange vibration. A thud, heavy, like a sack of rice hitting the floor. She paused, she waited. Then came the footsteps. They were not Min-jun's. Min-jun walked with a heavy, confident rhythm. These steps were shuffling, multiple, chaotic. They were moving fast. She stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at the freight elevator lights. They were descending. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the panic button Min-jun had given her and pressed it, holding it down like a lifeline. Then she killed the desk lamp, plunging the archive into darkness. She didn't run for the exit, that was where they would be coming from. Instead, she moved deeper into the labyrinth of shelves, toward the section of uncatalogued bulk items. She knew the acoustics of this place. She knew the shadows. The elevator doors chimed, a light vibration she felt in her teeth, and opened. Beams of flashlights cut through the dark, slicing across the dust motes. She couldn't hear them, but she could feel the aggression in their movements. They were tearing boxes off shelves, overturning tables. They were looking for the ledger, and they were looking for her. Nia squeezed into a narrow gap behind a stack of crate paintings, holding her breath. She watched through a crack as a beam of light passed inches from her face. The man holding it was the one with the scar she had seen in the lobby. He was shouting something. She saw the veins in his neck bulge. She clutched the panic button, praying that Min-jun was close. She wasn't just guarding a book anymore. She was guarding the man whose legacy was written inside it. If these men found the ledger, they wouldn't just destroy Min-jun's reputation. They would use it to blackmail him into submission, effectively ending his life. Suddenly, the flashlight beam swung back. It stopped right on the crate hiding her. The man had seen something, perhaps the tip of her shoe or the fresh track in the dust. He smiled, a cruel, jagged expression, and started walking toward her. Nia braced herself, looking around for a weapon. A heavy stone Buddha statue sat on the crate next to her. She wrapped her fingers around it. She wouldn't go down without a fight. Just as the man reached for the crate, the fire alarm strobes on the ceiling exploded into life, flashing blinding white light in a rhythmic, silent scream. The sprinklers erupted, dousing the basement in a sudden, torrential downpour. The distraction made the man flinch and look up. In that split second of confusion, a shadow detached itself from the darkness near the elevator. It wasn't Min-jun. It was a silhouette of violence, moving with terrifying speed. But before she could register who it was, the man in front of her was tackled, and the archives descended into chaos. The archive had become a strobe-lit nightmare. The fire alarm lights pulsed in blinding white intervals, flash, dark, turning the movement of the men into a disjointed stop-motion horror movie. Nia was crouched behind the crate, the heavy stone Buddha in her hand, her chest heaving. She couldn't hear the chaos, but she felt it. The floorboards jumped against her knees. The water from the sprinklers soaked her clothes instantly, plastering her braids to her face, blurring her vision. The man with the scar, the one who had been about to grab her, was no longer looking at her. He was on the ground, struggling against a dark shape that had collided with him. It was Min-jun. Nia watched, paralyzed, as the man she had shared coffee and silence with transformed into something terrifying. Min-jun moved with a brutality that was efficient and absolute. He didn't fight like a boxer, he fought like an executioner. In the strobing light, she saw him drive his knee into the man's ribs, a vibration she felt through the floor. The scarred man crumpled, his knife skittering across the wet concrete. Min-jun didn't hesitate. He delivered a final, silencing blow to the man's temple and rose, his chest heaving, water dripping from his hair like blood. He spun around, his eyes wild, scanning the darkness until they locked onto hers. The relief that washed over his face was visceral. He rushed toward her, slipping slightly on the slick floor, and grabbed her arms, checking her for injuries. His mouth was moving, screaming her name, but in her world he was mouthing frantic syllables in the rain. "Are you hurt?" He didn't write it, he shouted it, forgetting in his panic that she couldn't hear. He saw her confusion and shook his head, tapping his chest and pointing at the exit. "Go, now." But they weren't alone. 3 more men emerged from the shadows of the freight elevator. They were Beak's enforcers, wearing gas masks, carrying canisters that looked ominously different from the weapons Nia expected. They weren't here to search anymore. The panic button had tipped them off that security was coming. If they couldn't find the ledger, they were going to ensure no one else could read it either. Min-jun shoved Nia behind him, pulling a handgun from his waistband. He fired, three bright muzzle flashes that illuminated the room for split seconds. Nia felt the concussion of the shots in her teeth. One of the men fell, but the other two pulled the pins on the canisters and hurled them into the aisles of paper. They weren't gas grenades, they were incendiary devices. The archives, filled with dry, ancient paper and wooden shelving, didn't just catch fire, they exploded. The chemicals in the canisters burned hot enough to ignore the sprinkler water. A wall of orange flame erupted to their left, instantly eating through the section on the Joseon dynasty. The heat was a physical blow, a sudden, suffocating pressure that dried the water on Nia's skin in an instant. Min-jun grabbed Nia's hand and pulled her toward the stairs, but the fire was moving faster, fueled by the accelerant. It snaked across the floor, cutting off the main aisle. Smoke, thick and black, began to roll across the ceiling, choking out the strobe lights. Nia coughed, her eyes stinging. She looked back. The fire was racing toward shelf 4B, the box, the mislabeled box with the ledger. She stopped, digging her heels in. Min-jun yanked her arm, turning to look at her with furious confusion. She pointed frantically at the aisle that was about to be consumed. "The book," she mouthed. "The truth." It was right there. The evidence of his grandfather's crimes, the leverage that could destroy him, the truth she had sworn to protect. If it burned, the Kang family's lie would remain immortal. History would be rewritten by the victors, by the men who sold their own people. Min-jun looked at the aisle. The flames were licking the bottom of the shelves. He could make it. He was fast enough. He could sprint through the heat, grab the box, and get back. It would take 10 seconds. He looked at the box, then he looked at Nia. She was coughing violently now, her knees buckling as the smoke sucked the oxygen from the room. A burning beam from the ceiling collapsed between them and the exit, sending a shower of sparks cascading over them. The temperature was rising to lethal levels. If he went for the box, he would leave her alone in this inferno for 10 seconds. In 10 seconds, the ceiling could collapse. In 10 seconds, she could suffocate. The choice wasn't even a choice. Min-jun turned his back on the ledger. He turned his back on the evidence that could save his empire or destroy it. He grabbed Nia, sweeping her legs out from under her and hoisting her into his arms. Nia struggled weakly, pointing back at the fire. "No, the proof." Min-jun ignored her. He held her tight against his chest, shielding her face with his soaked suit jacket. He didn't run toward the ledger. He ran toward the service corridor, kicking open a heavy steel door just as the main shelving unit collapsed in a thunderous roar of sparks and ash. They stumbled into the narrow concrete hallway, away from the heart of the fire, but the heat still pursued them. Min-jun didn't stop. He carried her up the narrow emergency stairs, his lungs burning, his legs screaming. He could feel her coughing against his neck, her small hands clutching his lapel. He burst through the rear exit door and collapsed onto the wet asphalt of the loading dock. The cool night air hit them like a blessing. The rain was still falling, washing away the soot and the heat. Min-jun rolled onto his back, gasping for air, pulling Nia with him so she lay on top of him, safe. For a moment, neither of them moved. They just breathed, the cold rain mixing with the sweat and ash on their faces. Nia pushed herself up, her hands trembling. She looked down at Min-jun. His face was streaked with soot, his expensive suit ruined, his eyes red-rimmed and wide. She looked back at the museum. Smoke was billowing out of the basement vents, black and thick against the night sky. Sirens were wailing in the distance, blue and red lights reflecting off the wet buildings. The archives were gone. The ledger was gone. The truth had turned to ash. Tears welled in Nia's eyes, tears of smoke, but also of grief. The history she had tried to save, the justice for the victims in that book, it was all lost. She looked at Min-jun and tapped his chest, signing slowly, her hands shaking. "Gone. It's all gone." Min-jun sat up, wincing as he shifted his bruised ribs. He reached out and took her hands, stopping her frantic signing. He looked at the burning building, then he looked at her. He brought her soot-stained hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. He pulled a small, wet notepad from his pocket, the same one they had used for weeks. It was damp and charred at the edges. He found his pen, which miraculously still worked, and wrote a single sentence, his hand steady despite the adrenaline. "The paper is dead. You are alive." He showed it to her. Nia stared at the words. She looked at the man who had just let the only leverage against him burn to save a foreign archivist. He had sacrificed the guarantee of his safety for her. In the world of the Mafia, where everything was transactional, he had made a trade that made no sense unless... She looked into his eyes. The cold, calculating boss was gone. In his place was a man who looked terrified of losing the only quiet thing in his loud, violent life. Min-jun didn't wait for the police. He knew the protocol. The Beak clan would be fleeing and the authorities would be swarming. He stood up, pulling Nia with him. He took off his ruined jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was heavy, smelling of smoke and his cologne. He led her toward his car, which was parked in the shadows of the alley. His driver was there, looking panicked, engine running. Min-jun opened the back door and ushered her in. As the car pulled away, sliding through the wet streets of Seoul, Nia looked out the back window. The museum was receding, a pillar of smoke rising from its heart. She turned back to Min-jun. He was leaning his head back against the seat, eyes closed, his hand resting on the leather between them. She reached out and covered his hand with hers. He opened his eyes and turned his hand over, interlacing their fingers. He squeezed tight. They didn't speak. They didn't write. In the silence of the armored car, speeding away from the burning past, the only thing that mattered was the heat of his palm against hers. But the night wasn't over. As they crossed the Han River, Min-jun's phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. He finally pulled it out, his expression darkening. He read the text message and his grip on Nia's hand tightened until it almost hurt. He looked at her, his face pale beneath the soot. He quickly opened the notepad again. "We aren't going to the hospital," he wrote. "The Beak clan isn't done. They think I have the book. They think I took it out before the fire." Nia's eyes widened. The ledger was ashes, but the ghost of it was still dangerous. "Where are we going?" she wrote on the bottom of the page. Min-jun looked out the window at the city skyline, a landscape of lights and shadows. He wrote one word. "North." The north Min-jun spoke of was not across the border, but it felt just as desolate. They drove for an hour in silence, the city lights of Seoul fading into the rearview mirror, replaced by the encroaching darkness of the Paju countryside. The safe house was a brutalist concrete structure hidden deep within a dense pine forest, sitting on a cliff edge overlooking the Min-jun River. It was a fortress masquerading as a villa, cold and imposing. Min-jun parked the car in a subterranean garage. As the heavy steel shutters rolled down, sealing them inside, the adrenaline that had sustained Nia began to crash. Her legs gave way as she stepped out of the car. Min-jun was there instantly, catching her. He didn't say a word, he couldn't, and he knew it, but the tightness of his grip spoke volumes. He led her upstairs into a living room that was all glass and shadows. He didn't turn on the main lights, opting instead for a few dim floor lamps to avoid signaling their presence to anyone watching from the tree line. He guided her to a leather sofa and disappeared into a bathroom. He returned with a wet towel and a first aid kit. Gently, with hands that had killed a man less than 2 hours ago, he began to wipe the soot from her face. The cloth was warm and the rhythmic motion was hypnotic. Nia watched his eyes. They were no longer the cold, predatory eyes of the mafia boss she had met in the archives. They were haunted. She reached out and stopped his hand. She took the towel from him and began to wipe the blood from a cut on his cheekbone. He froze, letting her tend to him. For a moment, the violence of the night receded, leaving only the two of them in the quiet dark. Nia reached for the notepad, now stained with smoke and water, and wrote, "They think you have the ledger. What happens when they find out you don't?" Min-jun read it and sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "They won't believe me," he wrote back. Baek Dong-soo operates on greed. He cannot conceive that I would burn the ultimate leverage to save a person. He will come for us. He will tear this house apart looking for a book that no longer exists. Nia looked at the fire in the modern hearth that Min-jun had lit. She thought of the names in that ledger. The Hanwell Syndicate, the slaves, the foundation of the Kang family's wealth. It was all ash now. The physical proof was gone. She took the pen again, her hand trembling slightly. "The paper is gone," she wrote, "but I am an archivist. My job is to remember." Min-jun looked at her, confused. She continued writing, faster now. "I have a photographic memory for text. It's how I work in silence. I remember the account numbers. I remember the dates. I remember the names of the Japanese officers your grandfather traded with. I can rewrite it. Not all of it, but enough to destroy you, or enough to destroy Baek if he was involved." Min-jun stared at her, the color draining from his face. He realized then that he hadn't saved a civilian. He had saved the living embodiment of the ledger. She was the danger. If Baek found out she knew the contents by heart, he wouldn't kill her. He would take her. He would extract every number from her mind through pain until he had what he needed to usurp the Kang Empire. He gripped her shoulders, his eyes intense. "You must never tell anyone that," he wrote, pressing the pen so hard the paper indented. "You forget it. You forget everything you saw." "I can't," she wrote back. "It's the truth. The truth will get you killed." He slammed the notebook down. The vibration made the water glass on the table ripple. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out into the black forest. Nia watched his back. She understood his fear. He wasn't afraid of losing his empire anymore. He was afraid of the cost of keeping it. He turned back to her, his expression resolving into something grim. He pulled a gun from a hidden compartment under the coffee table and checked the magazine. "Baek is coming," Min-jun wrote. "He has a tracker on the car. I didn't remove it because I wanted him to follow me here. I wanted to draw him away from the city, away from his army." Nia's eyes widened. He had led the wolves to their door on purpose. "Why?" she wrote. "To end it," he replied, "tonight." The vibration came first. Nia felt it in the soles of her feet, a low thrumming of heavy engines approaching up the long driveway. Min-jun felt it a second later. He killed the lights, plunging the room into absolute darkness. The only illumination came from the dying embers of the fireplace and the pale moonlight filtering through the pines. Min-jun pulled Nia behind a thick concrete pillar. He pressed the panic button into her hand again. "Stay here," he signed, his movements sharp. "Don't move." He moved into the center of the room, standing in the open, a silhouette against the glass. Headlights swept across the room, blindingly bright, casting long, distorted shadows against the back wall. Then the engines cut. Car doors slammed. Nia counted the vibrations. 1, 2, 4, 6 doors. At least 6 men. She peeked around the pillar. Outside, in the snow-dusted courtyard, stood Baek Dong-soo. He was an older man, wearing a long camel hair coat, flanked by 5 enforcers with assault rifles. He looked at the house with a sneer. Baek shouted something. Nia couldn't hear it, but she saw the way Min-jun's posture shifted. He was calm, terrifyingly so. He opened the sliding glass door and stepped out onto the terrace, his hands raised, showing he was holding only a small black notebook, their communication pad. Nia watched through the glass. To the men outside, it looked like the ledger. Baek laughed, a visual convulsion of his shoulders. He extended his hand. He was demanding the book. Min-jun said something. He tossed the notebook onto the snow between them. Baek signaled one of his men to retrieve it. The mercenary stepped forward, picked up the damp, charred notebook and opened it. He shined a flashlight on the pages. He paused, confused. He looked at Baek and shook his head. It wasn't the ledger. It was just pages of scribbled conversations about coffee, silence, and soup. Baek's face twisted in rage. He pulled a pistol from his coat and aimed it at Min-jun's chest. Nia didn't think. She didn't calculate, she acted. She knew this house. She had seen the fuse box in the hallway when they entered. She knew that Min-jun relied on shadows, but these men had flashlights. They needed total chaos. She sprinted from behind the pillar, not toward the terrace, but toward the hallway. One of Beek's snipers saw the movement inside and fired. The glass shattered, a silent explosion for Nia, and shards rained down on her back, but she kept moving. She reached the breaker panel and yanked the master lever down. The exterior floodlights, the garden lights, the distant gate lights, everything died. The world went pitch black. For the men outside, their eyes adjusted to the bright headlights. The sudden darkness was blinding. For Min-jun, who had been waiting for a signal, it was the starting gun. Nia felt the floor shake. Gunfire. The rapid, staccato vibration of automatic weapons. She curled into a ball beneath the fuse box, hands over her ears even though it made no difference, feeling the house shudder with the violence of the struggle. Min-jun was a ghost in the dark. He knew the layout of his own terrace. He moved under the arc of the gunfire, tackling Beek. The other men fired wildly, confused by the sudden loss of light and the snow that had begun to fall, obscuring their vision. Min-jun didn't need to see clearly. He fought close quarters, using Beek as a human shield. Nia waited. The vibrations were chaotic, heavy thuds shattering glass, the sharp recoil of shots. Then slowly they stopped. 1 minute passed, 2. Nia lifted her head. The silence of the house had returned, heavier than before. She stood up, her legs trembling, and walked back toward the living room. The wind was blowing snow through the shattered windows. She stepped out onto the terrace. The air smelled of copper and gunpowder. Bodies lay in the snow, dark shapes against the white. She scanned them frantically. A figure was sitting on the low stone wall at the edge of the cliff, silhouetted against the faint gray light of the coming dawn. It was Min-jun. He was slumped over, holding his side. Nia ran to him, falling to her knees in the snow. He looked up. His face was battered, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead, and his white shirt was stained deep red at the ribs. But he was alive. He looked at her, his eyes struggling to focus. He reached out a bloody hand and touched her face, smearing a streak of crimson on her cheek. He smiled, a weak, pained expression. He tapped his chest, then pointed to her. "You," he mouthed. Nia frantically checked his wound. It was a graze, deep but not fatal, though he had lost blood. She tore the hem of her dress and pressed it against his side. He hissed in pain but didn't pull away. Beek Dong-soo lay dead a few feet away, his eyes open to the sky, the empire he coveted gone forever. Min-jun gestured for the notebook. It was lying in the snow, trampled and wet. Nia retrieved it. It was ruined, the pages stuck together. Min-jun took the pen from his pocket. He wrote on the cover, the only dry spot left. "It is over." Nia shook her head, tears freezing on her cheeks. She took the pen. "The truth is still in my head. I can still destroy you." Min-jun looked at the words. He looked at the sunrise bleeding purple and orange over the mountains. He took the pen back and wrote slowly, his hand shaking from the cold and the pain. "Then destroy me or rebuild me. I am yours." He dropped the pen in the snow. Nia looked at him. The master of the Jeomseong syndicate, the man who owned half of Seoul, was surrendering his fate to her. He wasn't asking her to forget. He was giving her the power to decide his future. He was acknowledging that the silence she lived in was the only place where he could be honest. She looked at the dead men, the burning memory of the museum, and the history of pain written in the ledger she had memorized. She could go to the police. She could write the memoir. She could bring down the Kang family. But then she looked at Min-jun's hand, resting palm up on his knee, waiting. She reached out and took his hand. She interlaced her fingers with his, gripping tight. She wouldn't expose him. Not yet. The past was ash, but the future was unwritten. She would help him clean the rot from the inside. She would be the silent architect of a new era for his family, one that didn't rely on the blood of the innocent. She would hold his truth not as a weapon, but as a compass. Min-jun squeezed her hand back. He understood. The sound of sirens began to drift up from the valley floor, police, or perhaps the cleaner crew from the syndicate. It didn't matter. Min-jun leaned his head on Nia's shoulder. In the absolute silence of the snowy morning, surrounded by the wreckage of his grandfather's sins, he finally found the quiet he had been searching for. They sat there together, watching the sun rise over a world that had tried to burn them, bound by the silence, the snow, and the ashes of a secret that would change them both forever. The end.